Hey everyone, welcome back to another Kitecast episode. I'm here with my co-host Tim Freestone. Tim, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm all right, Patrick. How are you?
Just fine. We're lined up to have a really interesting conversation. We always have interesting conversations on Kitecast episodes. Edna Conway is joining us. She has a very interesting background. I'll do a quick intro here for her. She's an innovative board director and executive. She's had stints as an executive at Microsoft and Cisco, 20 years at Cisco. We'll have to talk a little bit about that. I bet she saw a lot of change over those 2 decades. She's focused on forecasting the future of business, creates clear strategies to deliver new and secure operating models for a digital economy. She's highly sought after industry influencer, one of the reasons we have her on our show. She has over 30 years of broad and deep leadership of success, creating new organizations and delivering cybersecurity, risk management, sustainability, and value chain transformation across Fortune 10 technology companies. She currently is a senior non-resident fellow at Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. That'll be a little interesting tidbit to talk about today. She's the CEO and founder at EMC Advisors. She's an advisor and board member on more companies and organizations than I can actually list in the next 60 minutes. So we're going to forego those, but you can check out our LinkedIn profile to get a list of them. Edna, thanks for joining us today. We're looking forward to this conversation.
Oh, my pleasure and my privilege to be here, especially since I'm able to do it from my favorite place, my home in the live free or die state, New Hampshire.
Well, let's start the podcast talking a little bit about what you're doing now. You finished up some time as an executive at Microsoft, I think last year? And you've been doing a bunch of consulting, board advisement work, some nonprofit work. What are you up to right now?
Oh, a whole host of things. And, I think this is the gift that comes at a certain stage in your career. Everybody always says, don't use the word retirement. So what I'm saying is I'm in the portfolio stage of my career.
There you go. Right? I love it.
Because I'm still alive, well, and kicking. And it's an opportunity to think about some areas that I wanted to focus on. I love growth companies. And so being able to focus on growth companies as a board director, as well as an advisor and a growth partner at a PE, makes a lot of sense, because when you're at a large company like the ones that I've been at, and the 20 years prior to that executive stint, looking at representing broad spectrum of companies as an outside attorney, it gives you such a beautiful lens that has a very wide aperture. So I wanted to spend some time doing that. I also wanted to see if I could continue to influence some policy work. And that, short of going to the government, really means a think tank. And was lucky enough to have Carnegie Endowment for International Peace say, yes, we'd love to have you come work with us. And just recently, I think in January, we wrapped up something I was on the steering committee of, which was a project to look at the realities of systemic cloud failure and its risk now that we have all moved so ubiquitously to the cloud. And quite frankly, the folks who are really concerned about it are the reinsurers. So that was fun. And I have another idea that I'm ginning up and swirling around right now with regard to accuracy of AI that I'll be releasing in a panel at the RSA conference.
Well, that's great.
Yeah, I think there's something else too, which is I'm getting tired, gentlemen, of hearing folks say we don't have the workforce in cyber. Because if you look at all of the entry-level roles, a lot of them say 3 years of experience. We're hurting ourselves, right? And the other thing is we look at, do you have a computer science degree? For those of us who are of a certain vintage, shall we say, certain degrees didn't exist back then, right? I mean, I try to explain to people who write code, let's slow down now, because I went to school at a time when you went to the building where the computer was, and there were these physical cards that had holes in them, and they sort of look at you like, wow, that's intriguing. I actually had one fellow who looked at me and said, you don't look that old. And I said, well, thank you, I think. That was not the intent of the message I was trying to send. And so I have the privilege of being invited to sit on the board of trustees of Gallaudet University, which is our nation's and quite frankly the world's largest university for the deaf. And it spans students both from kindergarten all the way through graduate level courses, and it's funded by Congress. And so I think that community is in fact an untapped resource for not only the cyber workforce, but other workforce deficiencies that we have in today's economy.
Yeah.
So committed to moving the needle there.
Yeah.
And then I'm still working with some government folks on my tab, not as an employee, but and just because I think if you see the flag sitting above my head, I have the privilege of being a citizen of the United States of America, and I care.
That's awesome. You point on something I've heard multiple times in this podcast, which is all of these cybersecurity entry-level functions require non-entry level experience, and it happens again and again. And you said, we're shooting ourselves in the foot. I think absolutely. Have you heard of programs, or are there initiatives wherein companies of a certain size might have incubators for cybersecurity skills? No experience required. We'll incubate you for what you need for a year or two. The only requirement is you have to work for us for at least 2 years after that situation. That was kind of one of the things I was thinking over the past 6 months or so of, geez, that would be a good way to get over that barrier of you need no experience, just a pulse, and based on education.
That's an intriguing concept. I think. So look, without naming names, I think there are a number of nonprofit organizations that are out there that are trying to grow the workforce for cyber and risk. And I'm going to be meticulous about saying that because I think we need really to get to the point where there's always been business risk. It's always been evaluated. There's always been enterprise risk management, and cyber is one of them. It happens to be an important one, but it should be seen in the context of the business, right? Mm-hmm. Or the business of your household. And so I always remind people about that. I still remember when, one of my sibling asked me, hey, should I be buying this connected refrigerator? And I said, well, you make the choice. How much information do you want out in the world? Versus how important is it for you to know when you're already on the line at the supermarket, oh, gee, I forgot eggs and I need them. I know where my heart lies, which is I really want no one to know anything about what's in my refrigerator. Thank you very much, mold included. But I think you've got the nonprofit community, Tim, thinking about it. I think you actually have some for-profit companies that are focused on training areas and having programs for education in this arena. And I think you also have a number of organizations that have linked up with academic institutions. So if you think about nonprofits, for example, think about, the Executive Women's Forum, which has been talking about, women in cyber and risk and privacy for years and has a lot of content knowledge and expanded its reach. WESIS, Women Engineers, there's a whole set of them who exist really to, and I'm not being myopic here. Those happen to be the ones that I know about. There's also one that's really great called Cybersecurity that focuses on diversity and underrepresented community members in this field. And so predominantly think, the groups that you don't see represented largely at the right percentage equivalent to their existence in the workforce. Mm-hmm. And that spans a lot of groups, to be honest with you. I myself have been on a mission, Tim, to think about encouraging people in all fields to start reaching out and including this diversity of thought, which means we want folks who have different backgrounds. And then you go to companies who have relationships with academic institutions. Columbia has something. NYU has a great cyber program where they have an academic program for people who already been in the workforce and just say, I'm going to be crazy here, but I'm a nurse. I'm a truck driver and I want to go learn about this. And it's a shortened program. It doesn't have the expense usually associated with a 4-year undergraduate degree. And there are a number of companies that have stepped up, and I have the privilege of still serving as an advisor and a fellow on that. But, folks who want to embrace you and help you when you get out of the program, and also say, here's something we should be adding. 5 years ago, I'm not sure the program was really focused, for example, on ML or AI. Mm-hmm. Now it is.
This concept of looking outside the traditional sources for cybersecurity professionals gets me thinking about conversations I've had with some of my peers in marketing for specializations like running videography and so forth. You used to do apprenticeships, right? You'd attach someone, they'd be apprentice, they'd learn the ropes. That's no longer the case. So you have some who think they know everything. They really don't, as we know. And then in other instances, folks are thrown into the fire without any guidance or direction or training and so forth. Do you think cybersecurity is an area where apprenticeships could, help us bolster the skill sets that exist and attract new talent into this space?
It's an intriguing question, Patrick. I'm a big fan of going back to old school days. In old school, you often had somebody in the neighborhood. It wasn't formal, right? Or a parent, or a relative, or a favorite teacher who took you under their wing and taught you something. And I think I always remind people, just out of curiosity, when you go to a physician, I know what I ask. I ask, how old are you? The next thing is, how many of those procedures have you done? Because I guarantee you, I'm not sitting with the doctor who's straight out of school, because they may be the most brilliant person out of the most fabulous school. And the reality is they haven't done it. And guess where we learn as humans? We learn in active implementation. So your point is well taken. I think I have a model, and it's a motto. In fact, there was a book that just came out by Ed Adams talking about, how to break into cybersecurity, even if you don't love hacking. And he did some case studies, and I had the privilege of being one of his case studies. And I think the answer is folks will take you under their wing and teach you. I can't answer all of the LinkedIn messages that I get, but I try, especially for those of us who are at the stage in life where the joy is in watching companies grow, watching people grow. And I think there's twofold. One, it's inherent on all of us to do it. And you don't have to start a nonprofit. Here's what I challenge people to do. Pick just one. Do it well. And I'm going to tell you something that doesn't sound right in cyber or in business. Do it with love. Because when you do it that way, what happens is you follow the path that's best navigable by the individual whom you're assisting. And more often than not, you get a hell of a lot more from them than you gave.
Great point. Passion, right? What you're passionate about is what you need to do in life. I think that's a good end to that part of the conversation. You brought up something in the introduction I'm sure Tim wants to talk about as well, about influencing policy at the standards level, at the government level. Talk a bit about what you're doing there and what trends do you see taking place. CMMC obviously is a hot thing. We had Boeing fine just the other day. It was $51 million or something, like a huge chunk of change when you add it up. But you have other things like the new SEC filing that came out. What are you seeing happen there, and where are you involved?
So I think we live in a world now where there needs to be public-private partnership just as the norm. And I think the U.S. government has done a mighty job of trying to encourage that, right? Hard to do in a democracy. Sometimes easier to do in a more authoritarian regime. And hopefully we never get there. But I do think we, as members of the private sector, have an obligation to have our voices heard. And you can't just after the fact complain. So be part of the solution. A lot of folks say, I'm at a startup. I don't have time to do that. But you do. you have time to talk to a representative or time to send a message. And our government's particularly good when they put something out about asking for public comments, right? You don't need to have a lobbying organization to do that. And, a bit ago, I did something with the media group that I'm particularly fond of. And we talked about the SEC rule, and more importantly, the fact that people need to be aware whenever you create something that there is wonderful new capability that comes out of it. And there are always those who will use particularly new technology for evil purposes. It's not the technology that's inherently good or evil, right? It's us, that human factor. That's true also with regulation. So step back for a minute and talk about the SEC requirement. So a couple of things to note that are really intriguing. If you look at the definition of materiality, materiality is very clearly referenced back to the financial materiality that, we all saw that came out of SOX, which rose from the ashes of, I won't say the first financial disaster that the U.S. saw, because that was back in the Great Depression. But it came out of what we saw in the early to mid 80s. And then we saw another one in the 2000s, and God only knows what the economists are predicting we're in right now. I don't know. And so I think that the regulation is well intended. And I think that materiality has to be defined only by the enterprise that is actually experiencing the issue, because it's so intensely complex. But to make it simple, let's remind everybody what the SEC is striving for. It's to help the reasonable investor. And sometimes we make things so magically complicated and we muck it up with, as an attorney, I could say this, legal ramifications. Here's the rule. Am I better off knowing this as a reasonable investor? Well, here's what I always tell people bluntly. I don't know why you invest. I can tell you why I invest. I invest to make money. My social issues, I deal with elsewhere. I would prefer that you not beat people, not use slave labor, and that you not destroy the environment. But I'm investing to make money. I know very clearly what I'm doing it for. So if you have something that in theory meets a broad and vague definition of materiality, but it doesn't affect operations, its impact is significantly low, and more importantly, you're still operating and making profit, I'm not sure I really care as a reasonable investor. And so are we doing more harm than good? I don't know. But here's the harm side of that. There was a particular persistent threat actor who's well known, who actually, God love him, even before it was in effect, they deployed a ransomware attack on a victim enterprise. And then the victim enterprise didn't pay in a timely fashion, according to the ransomware deployers. So they filed a complaint with the SEC to say this rule requires that they file something, and we happen to know that there was an incident. So just fathom this. You're a regulator, and now you're faced with a complaint from somebody who is, well, perhaps not exactly the words, saying, hi, I perpetrated what could be a crime under a variety of U.S. laws, and I'm really irritated that they haven't paid me my ransom, so I'd like you to look into that. Are you kidding me? So now you have a regulation that has actually been weaponized. So that's why you need public-private, not only collaboration, but wisdom shared. And you need to be flexible enough to say, we tried this. Maybe we need to add something or change something in its regulatory implementation. So, Tim, I'm a little hard over on that one, probably a little bit more adamant than others to remember what the reason was. And I've met people who have said, look, if you had an incident, I really want to know about that. Well, let me clue you in. Every company you've dealt with who is a supplier to you as an enterprise or a small business, and every company you deal with as a consumer has had an incident.
Yeah.
Let's dispel that notion. Stop treating it like it's some unknown. Okay?
Yeah. It's to further expand upon just sort of regulations. I was at South by Southwest this week. Yeah, I think this week, was on a panel with a number of regulators. One of the women was the head of the AI regulation, or the executive order on AI, out of the White House. Pretty high level folks talking about regulatory action. It does seem like there's a lot more of a lean in on regulation, actual execution. But the piece that seemed, when I say execution, I mean creation and presentation. But it always seems the piece that pushes to the wayside is the teeth, the penalties, the fines, the execution of those penalties and fines. Am I off base here? What do you think about what's happening in the regulatory environment right now? Because as far as I can tell, the regulation that's driving the most action to cybersecurity decisions right now is CMMC, because they can take away the business, right? So there's like real meaningful harm if you don't apply to facilitate these regulations in your organization.
That's a complicated question, Tim. A couple of things. I think we have well-intended, usually well-informed regulators across the world, and certainly here in the U.S. As a result of that, they are acutely aware of the reality that you have to balance a goal you're trying to seek with the potential ramifications on business. You don't want to stop business from operating, right? And that's a delicate balance. It's a tough dance. Now, CMMC is a great example, but let's remember it took bloody 8 years before we started implementing regulations. There's a reason for that complexity. It's not just because people were thinking about hard things, which they were, but there were other political factors involved in that, and budgetary factors. But I do think that we can always look to the national security arena to say, hey, that's going to, in theory, be the highest standard. However, I'm of the mindset, I'm not sure everybody agrees with me. Legislation and regulation is a bloody lagging indicator. By the time you're talking about that, things have occurred. It's out in the free world. It's on the dark web, and we already have a problem, right? So step back for a minute and remember that as you experience that as a business operator, you have an independent motivation to achieve that goal. And I think even, with some of the things that you talked about, I think Boeing does a really good job of trying to drive quality. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to opine on whether there are issues or not, but do we need more regulation to fix that? I'm not sure, in all honesty. I think it's a mindset of the workforce. And so I'm going to step back and say, I think regulators are a little bit more sensitive to the penalty ramification because of the impacts on business operations, number one. I also think the solution for us is to, and this is my personal bias, we need to step up as workforce members and say, I take responsibility. And you can see differences in that attitude generationally based on what was going on in the economy at the time that workforce member came into the workforce. You could see whether they grew up digital or non-digital or somewhere in a hybrid environment. And so it's almost stepping back. If you remember, when we go back to FDR, for example, which is we're going to rally America and Americans around America. That does not mean we are unaware of or uncommitted to the world in which we operate. But it means that you as an individual have to care about what you're delivering. I'm going to make a bold statement. We've lost a little bit of that. Doesn't mean there aren't wonderful people doing wonderful work and who are very committed, but we've lost a little bit of that, and we need to go back to it. And our regulators are saying, step up to the plate and help us here. We really don't want to have a whip. We would much rather sit down and have a meal.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You said that something I want to double click on, which I agree with and hadn't really thought of it in that way, which is regulations or regulators are a lagging indicator of what's actually happening. Another way to put that is reactive. the most recent is obviously all the AI regulation that's starting now. That's in reaction to, November of last year, unarguably. Okay, so we're catching up to that. Do you have a sense of, like, if a regulation were to change the narrative on, or the process or the stages at which it comes out in the future, is there something that you would point to and say, there should be regulations coming out right now for what is going to happen in the next 5 years? Anything that you can point to like that, if they were to flip the script, so to speak?
I overregulation is not something I'm a fan of. So let me be forthright and say I come from the premise of there should be as little regulation as needed for societal protection. So put that at the foundation. Mm-hmm. And then to answer the question, I think there's something that's near and dear to my heart, which is, and sometimes we forget that, these things have been in the hopper. How long have we been talking about quantum encryption?
Yeah.
Right? It's hard. It's complicated. There's been movement. You need time for things to gel. We've been working on AI and ML. I think it was about 32 years now that my last calculation looked at. Mm-hmm. I might be off on that. But these large language models and the use of them in common parlance, so to speak, raised a number of ethical issues that I think regulators are concerned about from a societal impact. I want to say, you want to look at something and really step back for a minute. How about we actually have, and I hesitate to say the word mandate, but an international standard that says you should have an algorithmic and a policy approach. And it doesn't have to be a policy from a government. It could be, but it could be a policy approach to implementers and creators of AI. And I apologize, that four-legged creature that I told you about the desk.
You heard you talking about AI and quantum computing.
I'm excited.
Yeah, I told you it was around chips, and now quantum computing is its next issue. So bear with me as I try to soothe him by covering him and making it go away. But
no problem.
It seems to have done the trick for a couple of minutes. I think we have forgotten about accuracy. So everything is only, the old rule. It's like the rule of, you remember your mom said, eat your vegetables, eat fruit. There are basic fundamentals. I'm a big fan of like physics and the string theorem because there are rules that they always operate. Here's the rule. Garbage in equals garbage out. Okay. So before I get to ethics and bias, how about I actually algorithmically and policy-wise validate the accuracy of the data that's being input, because we're doing analysis on it. And so the output could actually be to the far left of accurate. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to make business decisions on that. Now, a teacher might also be equally concerned that I'm teaching folks that they really don't have to work hard, because I love, there's a video somewhere of a child using Alexa to do their math homework, right? Grade school level, like, Alexa, what is 17 times 48? And the parent walks in. That is not the intent of technology, right? So too, I understand that it's a morality and an ethics utilization. I think we need to make sure that the true benefit that can be brought to us, and there are a lot of folks working on this, is making sure that the data that is utilized and consumed is as accurate as possible. And I have a particular bias on that because I'd love to see us get to a higher fidelity of predictive risk. If I could like take my feet and a hammer and bang away Monte Carlo simulations, I would be a happy woman. But we had to wait for storage capacity, and we had to wait for compute capacity, and we had to wait for analysis. And we got there. And then the question is, how do you vet the accuracy of the data? Well, it takes some human involvement. You can do some of it algorithmically. Some of it you can't do algorithmically. I could think of probably 5 prompts that can't be algorithmically addressed. They need a sophistication level that can be far beyond where we are today. We may get there. So how about you have a policy?
Yeah, that makes absolute sense. But to your point, we may get there, right? It's just there's so many things that need to come together. Speaking of quantum computing, that could be a critical piece, assuming it delivers on the promise of speeding everything up, to the nth degree, right? It would speed that up as well. And that's the piece that I was thinking you might say is sort of, if we look into the future, I was in DC 3 months ago to talk about encryption around, quantum computing and how that's needing to evolve. But I was thinking at the same time, we sort of know where that's going, where quantum computing is going to eventually get. We know the thesis statement. Why not start the regulations on that thesis statement now? So when the thesis statement is realized, we already have the structure in place to keep it contained. And it's just kind of an interesting thought experiment on, again, just kind of flipping the script a little bit. But that's the one.
Yeah, Tim, the fundamental question is some things shouldn't be regulated and some things should. So sometimes you need to play them out, right, before you actually act. And like everybody, governments and regulators have a list of priorities of risks. So in the scheme of what's going on in the world today, I'm not sure that's on the top of the list.
For sure it isn't. I mean, it's a maybe risk. But to your point, we don't know until we experience it. But it'll be a fun journey. A quick shift in the conversation a little bit, because I want to make sure we get to it before we run out of time. You're on the board of a lot of cybersecurity startups, it looks like, right now. Is there a theme of challenge that they're facing with being in market, convincing people that what they have will help them? It's a very, very crowded space right now. And I do not envy the CISO of today navigating this crowded space of cybersecurity.
Over 10,000 vendors now on security, I read this week.
Yeah. Is there a theme there that, like, one of the startups a little bit more success? Are they all struggling with some sort of similar thing in their business growth? I mean, what are you seeing across the board there with these new cybersecurity?
I'm an advisor to a lot on security on the boards. They've spanned a lot, and I've been on a lot of boards. And I'm blessed to have had that experience. But they go from crazy things like, medical devices which will perform extracorporeal pulsatile flow for pumping when you're doing heart surgery, to one of the boards I'm on now is a great Canadian company that is moving the needle on supply chain efficiency and inventory management with an environmentally sound space utilization model that includes digital twins and AIs, basically a cube you put in your warehouse, and it has custom robots. Is it a tech company? Is it a supply chain company? The answer is yes. Intriguing question of, what are the risks from a security perspective? There are some, but not everything is all, I like to say, I actually, both sides of my brain work. So I'm not all cyber all the time. What I do see, however, is the answer to your question is the same risks in cyber that almost all startups face. And then they have some special ones. And the first one is, do I have a solution that somebody wants? Number two, is there one or more already out there that has grabbed a significant enough percentage of the TAM that, despite the fact that I might be the most brilliant and the best solution, that may not be the path? I always remind people who are old enough to remember, not that I don't love Microsoft Word, but I loved WordPerfect more than Microsoft Word. But try to go find WordPerfect.
Tim may not remember that, but I do.
So, there are plenty of solutions out there that were great. But the second thing is, are you a one-trick pony? And in some startups, to be honest with you, have to be. I'm doing quantum safety, and I'm preparing for quantum. That's what you're doing. Don't look at somebody and say, give me a platform with 16 modules. So too sometimes in cyber, right? But there's a company that I happen to be on that I think has a great potential. You could argue that MDR, managed detection and response, is a very competitive space right now. And they're looking at the future, and they've moved to something called managed cybersecurity risk reduction. So it's a platform module that makes you think about multiple aspects of cyber. So that second challenge is beyond just, does it scratch an itch and is there still a TAM? Is, how do I make life easier for my ideal customer profile? And that is what everyone struggles with, not just in cyber, but particularly in cyber right now, which is my budget is flat. If I'm lucky, it might be going down. I might be getting a little money on AI because, businesses, just like people, like to follow shiny objects. I think AI is a capability that we should be embedding in everything. It's not in and of itself something. So and you can see that by how many platforms are there now? I haven't looked at it. It's ridiculous. It's pushing 400, right? Yeah. So like, people like, I love Llama. I'm like, great, that's good for you. I'm a co-pilot person. I tried Gemini and I think it's better than Bard. Well, yeah, true. Because that wasn't a hard hurdle to get over, but nonetheless, brilliant people put their minds to it. And so I think you need to recognize that audience that you're selling to. And I think you also need to remember that you don't always sell cyber to people who are cyber savvy. Right? So I talked to a company recently. I'm a faculty member for something that is a research company, and they have clients and they will come and ask experts to talk to them. And it was very clear to me that I was talking to the security team, Tim, and they said, hey, we had a challenge. We want some advice, which is, the challenge was, I had a third party who hosts my let's say website. They host something for you, some operation, and they use the fourth party to them for something, and they saw some anomalous behavior, right? That might have included even filling out forms in a language that connotes a nation that might not be particularly friendly to us. And that's certainly not within our policy, and we had to figure that out. How do we capture and wrap our arms around that community? So they were realizing that they don't operate in isolation, that their third-party ecosystem is not just their first tier. That was not necessarily, so I was like, well, obviously, you have to go ask them about SQL injections. You have to ask them whether or not they're using, what kind of, file transfers they're using. You have to look at, They knew all of that. The methodology of how to reach out to that community was something that they hadn't really developed yet, or they had it, but they hadn't embedded security into it. So I think there's a window of opportunity, Tim, for, while it's crowded, how do we make cyber something that is embedded into the business, right? And an example of why I say sometimes government is a little bit behind, and this is with all due respect to my colleagues at CISA, this year's initiative is Secure by Design. I can list off at least 100 companies that I've been not worked at, but been part of engagements with that have, X, design for X. It's been sustainability, manufacturability, quality. I mean, how many people remember when there were ISO 9000 flags outside of buildings? People were very, very happy that they had gotten a quality certification. And you want to just drive by it today. If you drove by somebody that had that banner, I'd tell you, run for the hills. They're like 30 years behind the time, right? So too, secure by design. It should be. And I think Sis is right. It's not yet. But people have been working on it. That was a very long-winded way of saying, I think cyber is still a much needed market. I think people need to take their geek hats off and understand business. Business operates, and it needs solutions that say, oh, I might be helping you with identity and access management, but I've given you this beautiful GUI that's an interface that says my user experience is now helping my CIO on productivity and enhancement. It's helping my HR department with seeing, lagging utilization. And ultimately, it's helping all of us because I've identified a problem. A problem person might be the issue. And so maybe that problem person just needs some extra training. And so you solve your problem, you solve your human issue, you enhance productivity because you can see things faster. Sometimes that's important. And we think about speed of incident response. How about speed to help your operation? How useful is it to everyone, right? And so if you went and said, well, my ideal customer is the CISO or the CIO, interesting. Have you talked to the CFO? I can't get a meeting with them. Have you talked to your two ideal customers and said, this helps your CFO, it helps your COO, and your HR department might really love you for it. That's a very different mindset. But yeah, we're overcrowded. Everybody went to the shiny object. I don't want to minimize that. You're right, Tim. Okay. We're doing it with AI right now.
Yeah.
And you know what happens. Everybody throws some money at it and you see which ones stick.
Which ones will bubble out. Yeah.
And then there's consolidation.
Yeah. And then there's consolidation. And there's a graveyard of people that poured their heart and soul into hundreds, if not thousands of technologies. It's a painful process, but at the end, the right things bubble up.
It's the innovation process. I'm not always sure that the right things bubble up, but the winners
maybe the most innovative. I don't know.
They're for many reasons, right? But I love the idea of saying, can we change the mindset and show cyber's maturity? And start. People oftentimes are like, how could you have been a supply chain executive and a cybersecurity executive? And I'm like, well, first of all, I think security is physical security, logical security, operational security, behavioral security, and information security. Thank you for using the sexy new term cyber. We've had it around
for a long time.
Called information security, and it was usually somebody buried inside of IT who cared about it from the first moments we went digital, right? So not falling prey to marketing and recognizing who you serve and for what purpose is a beautiful thing.
Mm-hmm. Good answer. Thank you.
Well, Edna, we could have a very lengthy conversation and do this all over again for 50 minutes and cover a whole new realm of questions with you. I had some that we didn't get to, obviously. Tim, any final thoughts or questions for Edna before we close out the podcast?
No, I think just a final thought as I was sort of processing your answer there, there was a nugget in there about, truly helping your ICP, making their life easier. Another word for easier might be better, but it's like that human aspect of your market. What can I do? Not my company, not my business, to help your life be easier in your role at your company, and drag in the product in that process versus the features and bits and bytes and stuff. That's an astute comment that I really will probably take on for the rest of my life. What are we doing to make your life easier or better? And if we can answer that, we'll probably get people to pay attention.
Well, we've seen that with some of the cyber technologies that are out there, like endpoint management, some of the advancements we've seen in the last, 5-6 years, where users can actually flag phishing. They don't have to send an email. They can block certain senders and so forth. It makes their job just easier. So even in, fairly basic level of cybersecurity, we've seen those advancements. And I'm sure as we get into more sophisticated capabilities within the cyberspace, the same is going to ring true.
Yep. That's great. Thank you for summarizing that. I appreciate it. I might steal that as well.
Well, Edna, thank you for your time today. We're going to have to do this again. You're a fount of information, and we appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks, Edna.
Be here. Thank you so much, gentlemen.
Thanks to our audience members. For other episodes of Kitecast, go to kiteworks.com/Kitecast.